All right, so in this chapter, we're going to build a restaurant newsletter page. All right, but before we look at that, I want to go over Less, which is another CSS pre-compiler. Okay, so basically it's very similar to Sass, which we used back in I think chapter 6. A lot of the same features. The main difference between the two is that Sass runs on Ruby, on the Ruby programming language, and Less runs on JavaScript. And in order to install Less on our system, we're going to need to install Node.js. All right, so Node.js is basically a server-side framework for JavaScript. Okay, so it's basically running JavaScript on the server. We're going to install Node, and then we're going to use something called the npm package manager, which stands for, I think, Node Package Manager. And we can install Less through that. All right, and then to compile it, we're going to use a program called WinLess, which is a Windows program that will compile our Less code. Much like Scout, which we used back in the Sass chapter. Pretty much the same thing. Now, if we go ahead and look at the site here, I'm at lesscss.org, and I clicked on Language Features, and basically it shows you a lot of the same stuff that Sass offers. Okay, we have variables, which is probably the most helpful thing, at least in my opinion. Now, the difference between the two is that Sass used a $sign for their variables, and Less uses an @sign. All right, so we can set variables, mix-ins, which are basically pre-filled blocks of code, kind of like functions. You can see we have a mix-in called bordered, and that's given in a border top and bottom, and then down here for the menu link, they're adding the bordered mix-in. All right, so pretty much identical to Sass. Nested rules, all right, so we can nest things. You can see that we have an ID of header, and nested inside of that we have a class of navigation. All right, so media queries, operations, functions, a lot of the same stuff. Okay, extend, we can extend classes. I'm not going to go through all of this. Import, all right, so we can import just like we did in the Sass chapter. So what we're going to be building is this. It's basically just a one-page restaurant newsletter that you would maybe get in an email or something like that. It's really cleanly coded. We have a navigation bar up here, which they don't go anywhere, but normally on a newsletter you'd have a link to your website, maybe a products page, and maybe a blog. This logo is just a stock logo that I found. We have a main image. We have some, I guess, welcome text or main text. Then we have this month's specials, which are unordered lists with images. And then we have new menu items. Okay, so this is what we're going to build. It's very simple. Nothing new here. I just wanted to do something simple because I want to focus more on how to use Less and add that to your workflow. So let's set up our environment before we do anything. All right, so the first thing we want to do is download Node.js. So I think it's nodejs.org. Yeah, all right, so if you're on Windows or no matter what you're on, you should have an option to download. So I'm going to click the big install button. Okay, I'm just going to install it in the default location. And we do have, I think I mentioned it before, but we do have a good series on Node.js if you want to learn more about it and using JavaScript on the server. We're not going to actually need to know any of the APIs or anything for Node. You just need it to be able to run less. Okay, so that's installed. Now what we want to do is open up a command line. So cmd, and just to make sure it's installed, we want to say node v. Okay, it's telling us we have version 0.10.31. And if we go back to the less site, it should tell us what we need to do. If we go to usage and so on the home page. Alright, so right here, now that we have, you can see the node.js package manager, this is how we can install it. We got to use the npm command install gless. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. npm, whoops, that's not a tag. npm install gless. Alright, so that should be installed. Now to compile it, to compile our less files into a CSS file, we can do it through the command line. They give you instructions right here. But what I want to do is use something called winless, which is a really easy to use program that's very similar to Scout for Sass. Alright, so I'm going to download this and open that up. Alright, just go ahead and install that. And the usage is right here. Basically, when you add a folder to winless, winless will start watching the less files in it. So basically we just got to drag our project folder over and it'll watch the less files, and every time we save it, it'll actually compile the changes into a CSS file. I'm pretty sure we can close the command line. Okay, so that's done. And I just want to get a desktop icon here. Alright, so now our machine is ready to begin development with less. And what I want to do now is just create our file structure. Alright, and then in the next video we will start the HTML. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call it newsletter. Alright, so we'll create a new folder called IMG, and I'm going to bring over all the images we need. Basically we have 6 images of food. Well, we have 7, but this one is for the showcase, which is the big image. And then these are for the specials and the new menu item area. And then I have a simple logo that I created. Well, I didn't really create. I took. It's actually a stock royalty-free logo. Alright, so let's grab all of these and put them inside of our image folder. Okay, we can close that. And we'll create a CSS folder. We'll create a less folder and our index file. Alright, so inside of our less folder, I'm going to create 2 documents. First one is going to be called variables.less. Okay, so this is where we're going to hold our variables and mix-ins. Alright. We're only going to use a few things. We're only going to have, I think, 2 variables for the primary and the secondary color, and then we'll have a couple mix-ins for border radius and something else. I forget, but we'll get into that. And let's create another file can call this main.less. Alright, so main.less will be obviously our main file where we'll add our CSS. Alright, and then in the CSS folder, I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call it style.css. Okay, so this is the actual CSS file that will link, and everything we do in the main.less file is going to be compiled into this CSS file. Alright, so that's pretty much it for as far as the structure goes. In the next video, we will start to add the HTML.